Good morning. For 4 News Now, I'm Rob King. Today as a station, we are working on a special reporting project looking at the state of women and girls in Spokane County. So this morning, I have the privilege of speaking with the organization leader that helped commission this report, Heather Hamlin, the executive director of the Women Helping Women Fund. So we'll go ahead and bring in Heather just to ask her about the report and what's going on in it. Heather, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me, Rob.
Of course. Heather, let's just start with why does your organization put out this report? And I believe this is the second one since 2019. So why now in 2023 and why put it out?
You're exactly right. This was something that actually started way back in 2016. And Women Helping Women Fund has a long history here in the Spokane community. But we always wondered, are we as grant makers funding the right programs and the right nonprofits that are really moving the needle? And that is about the time that everyone started really making those data-driven decisions, right? And so we decided that we needed to look at our community, really at women and children specifically, and get a good benchmark on where our community is. Where are we doing really well? Where are the gaps in services? Where are the gaps in funding? And so that is how this came to play back in 2019 with the first report. Since then, we have spent the past couple of years working on a second report that just released. And this is focused really on our girls. So we're looking again at the state of women and children with a deeper dive into that maternal and that first 5 years of children's lives.
Got it. Yeah, like you said, the latest report, Our Girls, a State of Women and Children. It's a follow-up to that previous report. You mentioned you wanted to look at some of the good, but reading the report, Heather, there's not a lot of good in it. Well, one of the big things that really stuck out to me is that from 2015 to 2020, women who struggled with poor mental health nearly doubled in that time frame. Other statistics along those lines were moms twice as likely as dads to struggle with poor mental health, and suicide being the second leading cause of death in children in our county. And those, unfortunately, are pre-pandemic numbers. So likely it's possibly gotten worse. It seems really bad.
Yeah, it definitely isn't great when you look at the data. What I hope is that when folks access this report and look at the data, that they see the humanized stories that are woven throughout. So sure, the data looks like it's pretty dismal in some areas, but in the full report, we also look at the bright spots in our communities, those providers that are going above and beyond, trying innovative new solutions to get a drastically different outcome. Those are really, really bright for Spokane. The other area, like I mentioned, is those voices of these interviews of the Our Girls that are woven throughout. They show resilience, they show strength, they show compassion. They understand that they are setting the stage for the next generation while they're honoring the previous generations. I mean, the really, really powerful stories. So the data isn't great in some areas. We know that we have work to do as a community, but I never want to lose sight of those bright spots in the work that's being done.
Absolutely. So to clarify those, I guess for people who haven't read the report, there's little snippets throughout it that kind of show personal examples of people experiencing some of the statistics that are throughout it. So those were real people.
Yeah, they were real people. So this project was really guided by a steering committee of local women. They were daughters and sisters and scientists, scholars, service providers, neighbors and friends. And we really did all of these interviews. And then we took those stories, we anonymized them, and then we wove those throughout so that you could actually understand point of views from different women in our community from all walks of life.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's important because then people can kind of, I mean, not put a face, there's no pictures, but put a sort of a face to the statistics. Because sometimes you can see a lot of numbers and it can be overwhelming to someone, and they're like, okay. So
Yeah.
I guess having that real world example is important. One of the ones that I found super interesting reading it was disparities in life expectancy by neighborhood. Now, looking at the two extremes in the Riverside and downtown area, which is where I live, the life expectancy is 72 years old, but in the Southgate area, it's 88 years old, which is a 16-year gap all in one county, which seems massive.
It is massive, and it's pretty important to realize that historical policies really have lasting impacts on life expectancy across Spokane County. And we don't realize that those historical policies will play out for generations to come, but here we are. It's always fascinating too to look at what are those opportunities that some of those zip codes allow that others don't. So when we dive in and we look at that, it's pretty fascinating information.
So, by those opportunities, do you mean access to resources?
It is. It could be access to resources. It could be cultural opportunities within that zip code. It could be the school district. It could be, I mean, just so many things play into that. The other thing about opportunities, the flip side would be the barriers, right? So, what are the barriers that some zip codes have that others don't? Is it public transportation? Is it safe, affordable housing, childcare? When we look at it by zip code, it tells a pretty interesting story.
So, all those factors kind of add up to a 16-year disparity from one of your other Spokanites.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's incredible. I did want to touch, or I guess let's stay on that point. What can be done? Is it just, particularly for that one, is it just investment in the community in those areas to try to lift up those lower life expectancy areas?
It really can. We can do targeted grassroots kind of initiatives. We can also look at kind of higher level, right? Not everybody is going to be in the weeds on resources and if your zip code is a childcare desert, but there are things that all of us can do. Cooperation is really the key for a thriving community. And it is our collective responsibility to make this type of change. I would say a couple of the key things for all of us to keep in mind is knowledge is power, right? So this is a benchmark of our community that will come out again by Women Helping Women Fund and our funding partners. And we really want you to know where we are right now versus where we're going and what we need to do to get there. The other is volunteer, right? Like we each have this responsibility. Are we volunteering our time? Are we giving any of our talents to these nonprofits, to these resources and paying it forward? And then really lending your voice, right? So organizations are working to develop these policies, but they also need folks that are going to advocate and really help to make sure that they come to fruition.
Got it. Heather, another statistic that really stuck out to me was you guys said 50% of women in our community ages 18 to 34 are in unstable housing. That 50%, not to be obvious, it's half. That's 1 in 2.
That's exactly it. So there's a little bit more to that stat, right? So it's not that they're currently in unstable housing, it's that they have experienced unstable housing in a period of years leading up to the data. I can think of many of my own kind of childhood friends, or you look at your work colleagues and you get to know them better. These stories come out of a time when their families were in unstable housing situations. A lot of times it is women-led households, and it doesn't always look like they're homeless and staying in a shelter. They're doubling up with friends. They're sleeping in a hotel for a couple of nights. Maybe they're staying in an RV in someone's backyard, right? There are so many different areas and how that unstable housing can look, but that stat is really startling.
And then one of the issues is there's got to be just a lack of housing options for people.
There is a lack of affordable housing, especially when you look at different demographics of a family and how they're made up. One of the indicators in the report that we really kind of broke out, we call it social math, right? So there's math and then there's social math when we can say X number of people are affected, and that's 8 classrooms full of kids. When we look at that, we looked at so many of the different areas around single mother households, and if they made that kind of median average income and then they paid for childcare for a toddler and a preschooler, that mother would only have $500 left over for rent, for utilities, for food, for transportation each month. And I think that is really telling, right? It's not just the lack of affordable housing, it's the lack of affordable childcare and how that plays into so many things.
And $500 a month is obviously unsustainable.
Absolutely. That's why so many of those important resources like TANF and WIC and SNAP are really, really important to these households. And some might say, well, that's great. I would love to see them make a better wage. But then you run into this kind of benefit cliff with so many of these families where they are getting some resources that help them survive and maybe even thrive the tiniest bit. And then they get a little bit of a raise at work and they make too much for all those benefits and they're right back to where they started. It's a really complicated situation that many find themselves in.
Yeah, the benefit cliff was one of the things that, like you said, was touched on. I had never heard of that. It does make sense when you think about it. It sounds unbelievable. It's like if you wanted to take a promotion at work, it's going to negatively impact your life because you can no longer afford, or you make too much money for some of these programs that are supposed to help you.
Yeah, it's a real possibility.
Oh, it's awful. Another one of the big ones that pointed out is domestic violence in our county. It is much higher than the rest. Spokane County is almost double the rate of the state of Washington. From 2016, domestic violence was reported as 10.4 cases per 1,000 people, and that went up to 14.2 in 2020. Again, those are pre-pandemic numbers, and those are also just reported cases. So you got to think there's probably a variable there that would be unreported cases as well, which could be as high as the reported cases.
Oh, absolutely. We know that domestic violence, for every case that is reported, there are probably multiple cases that are unreported. I'm a big fan of End the Violence and all of the work that they're doing over there with the Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition. They were also involved in this report and the data and funding of it. And I think that when we look at domestic violence, Spokane does have such a high incidents per capita. What are we doing different? What are we doing different to be proactive? What are we doing different to protect these victims? I think that there's just so much there.
So what are some of the factors that maybe your organization sees as why it's so high here, or what are even the theories?
I mean, I don't know that I could go into that as well as maybe End the Violence could, but overall, our families aren't supported. Our children aren't supported. It's very cyclical. Domestic violence often is, and I think that there's a lot more that can be done on a multi-generational level to not only impact the women that are maybe experiencing it right now, or the men, but then also the children that are watching that unfold and how it's being handled.
You mentioned the cycle. The cycle not just in domestic violence, but there's a cycle in poverty, a cycle in poor mental health. Will that get better on its own if you just withdrew and put your hands up and said, let's just see how it plays out? It would exacerbate, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's not something that's probably going to solve itself. It hasn't at this point. It's going to take a whole community really putting together a plan and everybody making a very conscious effort to reset that cycle. Poverty is definitely generational often. Domestic violences, we look at abuse, we look at things like this. Oftentimes they're correlated right back to childhood, right? And those early childhood, those adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And I think that you can see kind of how that pattern unfolds and continues on.
Can you explain what ACEs is?
Sure. Adverse childhood experiences are a set of indicators that can be experienced in a child's life. There are about 10 of those, and they are adverse, right? That could be a parent is in jail, your caregiver has unstable, mental health. There could be substance abuse. It could be neglect. It could be violence, witnessing violence. So those are indicators that often are correlated to outcomes later in life. So a higher adverse childhood experience, or ACEs score, usually can be correlated to that cycle continuing on, unless there's really a caring community that can help change that.
Absolutely. So I guess that kind of leads us into what needs to be done. I mean, these statistics are depressing. I mean, to put it bluntly, this is our community. These are the people we live with, the people we know, and it's worse here than other places. And what can people do? Is there any hope?
Oh gosh, there's so much hope. And really those bright spots in the report are woven throughout so that you can see so much of the good work that's being done. It's easy to get very just I would say sad. It's easy to get sad when you look at the data, but there are so many things that we can do. Um, the current trends in our community really point to some specific areas for opportunity. Some of those highlights on the things that we can do, we can ensure that all families have the same opportunity to afford basic needs and access those vital resources. We can improve access to culturally centered mental health resources for all ages. This is something that comes up time and time again. We can support programs and policies that really help children grow in those resilient households. And then I think we can create opportunities to ensure that everyone, especially members of the historically excluded communities, that they feel involved and they feel supported and that their well-being matters.
So we do need to take a full community approach where everybody needs to be a part of this.
We absolutely do.
Awesome. Heather, one of the last things I wanted to talk about is you guys have you're telling folks to fight like a girl. Can you explain what that means?
We are. We're coming off of last week an event, Women Helping Women Fund, and the event was titled Give Like a Woman, right? And fight like a girl, give like a woman. It's very reminiscent of that kind of play like a girl. And that was a big sports campaign a long time ago. And what it is just that, especially event last week, like Give Like a Woman, is that when women come into something, we wrap our arms around, right? We bring a community of others with us. We solve problems and we really kind of link arms and make a difference. And so when we say give like a woman, it was give with everything you have, right? Give your time, give your talents. If you can, give your treasure. But then this fight like a girl is a lot like that. And it is just, there is something so powerful about women, about girls, about children, really about every individual that we want to empower and we want to celebrate. So the more that we work together, the further we'll get for our community.
Awesome. Heather, I did also want to talk about the resources that are available to people. Your organization works with, I don't know, all of them in the county. So what are some that you'd like to highlight that people should be aware of?
Oh my goodness. So many nonprofits. Our organization is so unique, right? We get all of these women together that want to make a difference. They pool their money and then they decide together where that money is going to go. So last week, we awarded over $300,000 to local Spokane nonprofits that are benefiting women and children, obviously across Spokane County. And it has been so neat to watch those nonprofits. They hosted tables at the event last week with 1,100 attendees learning about all of their specific programs. Some of the great things that I think right now are happening in Spokane, Feast World Kitchen. I love all the things that they're doing, especially for the refugee and immigrant community, providing these women an opportunity to use their skills and give back and earn money for their households and really get involved in Spokane. That's a vital resource. It's more than just going and grabbing a quick lunch or a dinner. When we look at transitions and Women's Hearth, I think what they're doing downtown is so beneficial. When we look at oh gosh, so many. Create your statement.
That's okay.
I could go on and on.
You don't have to name them all. But are there enough of these programs in our community? Is it just that people don't know about them and they have access to help that they're just not aware of? Or could there also be more?
Oh, there could definitely be more. And it's not that there needs to be more nonprofits or more programs per se. It's that it's hard to connect sometimes directly with the end user, right? So there are women that are struggling and they don't know where their next, meal is going to come from for their family, but maybe they don't know about Women and Children's Free Restaurant. So how do we support Women and Children's Free Restaurant so they can connect with that family? And then how do we connect with that family and empower them with the resources so that they know exactly where to go and how to prevent this need from happening, right? Like how can they be self-sufficient in the future? There's just a lot of really good things happening.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I mean, you want to end on a hopeful note, so it's good to know that there are these programs available. You mentioned before we started an education campaign about getting this information out to the community. A lot of people don't know how much our women and children are struggling in Spokane. So what can you tell me about that?
Sure. I can tell you 62% of all Spokane County residents are either women or children. That's a big number, and that's a big group that we need to make sure that we are wrapping our arms around, right? So the data is really an education campaign, and we are proud to partner with a lot of funders to get this out all summer long, all fall. And it's really that knowledge is power, right? You gotta name it to tame it. If we know where we are right now as a community, and we know that we have eyes on it and we have passion behind it, where will we be in 3 years when we do this report again? So the education is knowing where we are, where the gaps are, and then what we can do to make the gaps a little bit smaller.
Awesome, Heather. Well, I hope people hear this, and I hope they get that spark in order to really help this beautiful community that we have. I want to thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to add?
Nope, that's it. Thanks, Rob.
Awesome, thank you. Well, Heather, thank you, and I will reach out to you and say thank you again. I wanted to, if you missed any of this interview, you can watch the whole thing later on kxly.com. I want to thank Executive Director of the Women Helping Women Fund, Heather Hamlin, for joining me. Again, if you missed any of this, it'll be up on YouTube, on our social medias. This is a special reporting project that we're working on here at 4 News Now today to get this information out to folks. We have anchors, reporters covering this from all different facets with special coverage tonight on 4 News Now at 6. So thank you for joining. We will do a KXLY Plus daily rundown later in the day, but for now, live in studio, I'm Rob King for KXLY Plus.